Hello and welcome back to the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast. Today I'm joined by special guest presenter Martin. Martin, do you want to say hello?
Hi everybody.
We're going to be talking about the Mexican Grand Prix, the Red Bull cost cap and the Aston Martin cost cap scandals, and potentially much more. So, the Mexican Grand Prix. Overall, I thought it was a pretty boring race with not much on-track action happening, but still the streak of not one race with all 20 cars finishing continues. Do you have any thoughts about the Mexican Grand Prix?
Pretty much the same. Not the most exciting. Mercedes made the total wrong tyre choice, going to the hard tyres later on, and bringing George Russell in on the very last lap to change his tyres for super softs, I think it was, to try and get the fastest lap was a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. There was a bit of drama in the pit stops with wheels not being put on correctly aligned and 6-second pit stops as opposed to 2.4 per second pit stops. So all in all, not a very exciting race.
I think it's a bit entertaining the fact that 6 seconds to us in the 21st century watching Formula One is slow, whereas like back in the 50s, they were like really long pit stops.
Yeah, it's just technology has moved on, hasn't it? I mean, the fact that they can lift the car up on two jacks, as opposed to jacking up each corner like they do in NASCAR and things like that, and all four wheels being changed at the same time. So it's going to come across as back in the olden days, it was a bit archaic the way they did it, but unfortunately, that's the way it's going. But yeah, you get a bit of excitement every now and then, but I really don't think it's the way to go.
Well, in NASCAR, they can only have 2 people on the car at one time, and because of all the refueling and stuff, there's so many rules about it, and like IndyCar and everything, they've got so much more excitement through pit stops.
Yeah, the fact that you've got two people on the grid with the pit stops, or 2 people in the pits doing the pit stops in NASCAR, and then you've got potentially 3 on each wheel, a jackman front, a jackman back, a standby jackman front and back, and then obviously someone holding a pit board saying stop or go.
I think I've counted 18.
Yeah, it's a very labour intensive job for 2.5 seconds,
and they have to train a lot, as Hagar said.
Yeah, I mean it's like anything. Practice comes perfect, and hence Checo had the fastest pit stop this year, 2.1 seconds to change all 4 tyres. Personally, I would bring back fueling to add a bit of excitement. I'm not due to the fact of the cars catching fire and things like that, but they refuel superbikes, they refuel NASCAR, so and why can't they refuel F1?
When Jos Verstappen was driving for Benetton, how he got set on fire. Obviously, we don't want reenactment to that because health and safety's moved on quite a bit now. But I think I do agree with you because, like, there was that one race, and I can't remember who it was, but they just sort of ran out of fuel and just went, wee, rather than...
They go on about being net zero by the year 2030, but at the moment you've got a car doing 72 laps, which equates to 300 and...
I think the minimum's 308.
308 kilometres, and they can do it on a tank full of fuel. The cars can't be that efficient, surely. Obviously, they're on full throttle a lot of the time, and they're up the gears and down the gears, so the engine is working hard, potentially up to 18,000 revs. So the car itself, it makes you wonder how big the fuel tank is in the car. I think it would bring a massive excitement back to refuel for the fans, basically, because it's all about the fans, isn't it? Or it should be, in my opinion.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that Formula One are just missing a trick because they're trying to bring in these like sprint races. Like, for example, we've got this weekend with the Brazilian Grand Prix and then the British Grand Prix. But I don't think the fans want that. I think the fans want actually like exciting at races. Like, so been off some of the not great tracks. And also the size difference in the 2008 to 2022 Formula One cars is massive. So tracks like Monaco, where Formula E, they proper go at it and overtake like idiots, like they're driving Dodgems. But that doesn't happen in Formula One because the cars are just too big.
Yeah, again, that's it. Everything's increased in size. They get about 110 kilograms of fuel per race, which equates to, I think it equates to about 7 miles per gallon, which isn't amazing really when you think that F1 wants to get to net zero. But on the back of that, yeah, with regards to overtaking and things like that, it's clear that Red Bull have some serious advantage. I don't know why, I don't know how. Last year it was Mercedes, this year, 2 years ago it was Mercedes, then it was Red Bull and Red Bull. How can Max Verstappen pull out a 40-something second lead over a third place car when at the end of the day they're all supposed to be exactly the same? They're supposed to be the same size engine, they're roughly the same power output. It all comes down to aero, and that's obviously where we come into the cost cap, the cost cap, where the cost cap has been breached. And I do honestly think that the fine and the punishment that they've been given, in my opinion, isn't enough.
Well, Toto Wolff was saying, well, if they're going to get like a light punishment, then, you know, how does it affect us next year? We're going to overspend. And then Aston Martin is, I don't think they've overspent by that much. It was a few $100,000. I think it was $400,000. But yeah, Red Bull, apparently, if they had have declared the taxes properly and all of that jazz, they would have only overspent by 400,000 rather than, what was it, 1.7 million?
1.86.
Oh. So yeah, and then it was a bit funny because on Twitter someone said Red Bull were hiring a new accountant, which is a bit ironic.
What you've got to realise is that Red Bull have overspent. Christian Horner played down the fact that they'd overspent. He blamed the catering. But at the end of the day, he is team principal, and he has got to sign off any overspend within the team, or any spend within the team has to be ultimately signed off by Christian Horner. Now, has he pleaded ignorant, thinking he can get away with it because of Red Bull status, basically? Do they think they're untouchable? Now, surely, if that was the likes of Williams or the likes of Haas, yeah, or Alfa Romeo, they would have potentially lost points as opposed to just receiving a fine. I mean, and all right, they've got the 10% reduction in aerodynamic development next year, but I still think it's too soft, because they've done it once and they're going to do it again and again and again, and obviously they're getting some sort of massive benefit for the lead that Verstappen pulls out when he starts way down the order, which isn't very often, to pull it back and get to the front. Yes, it's down to a certain amount of the driver's skill and things like that, but you look a few years ago, Hamilton couldn't be touched, and everybody was saying, oh, there's things with the Mercedes, this is done with Mercedes.
The pulley steering.
Yeah, they were saying the steering wheel was something to do with it, or the pull steering. But where's their advantage gone? And how come Red Bull have got that advantage? Surely the lower teams, Haas, Aston Martin, I know Alfa Romeo did quite well this weekend, well, with regards to Bottas, but surely it's all down to aero. because what I would like to see is the top drivers, as in Hamilton, Verstappen, put in a Williams or put in a Haas and things like that to see if it is purely the driver or purely the car.
Reverse grid.
I wouldn't even reverse grid because at the end of the day, reverse grid, I think, wouldn't really work because they've got such an advantage that they would come through anyway.
Yeah, they would. I saw an interesting stat a couple of years ago. Not a couple of years ago. It was about a season a couple of years ago, and it said that when Mercedes were dominating, they were putting something like 1,161 horsepower out, whereas Red Bull were getting 980 something. And so this is like in the junior divisions. In F2, F3, traditionally it's always been Prema who've had the strongest team and the strongest cars, and they've just been miles clear ahead of everyone else. And so when you're paying, like, you know, to be in Formula 2, everyone should have an equal car. And I'm not saying, like, in Formula 1, Latifi would win because, no disrespect to the geezer, but I don't think that'd happen. But if you're, like, competing, you want everyone to be given equal opportunities. And people just aren't given that because of the advantage over the horsepower or the aero, like my dad said. Or, I don't know, however you change a Formula 1 car.
The Formula 1 cars are developing at such an alarming rate that development will always outstrip track time and things like that, because the argument should be that all cars should have the same engine, well, which they have, 1.6 V6, but they should be limited to a power output, for argument's sake, let's just pick a figure, of 900 horsepower. Your hybrid is there for two reasons, and I totally disagree. My personal view is the DRS. At the end of that, why should you need a DRS? If the driver's that good, he shouldn't need additional aids to pass a car. He should do it on his skill and his strategy.
What I disagree with is you getting DRS over the back marker car. So say, I don't know, Verstappen and Hamilton having a battle and they were in P1 and P2 and they come up to Latifi and then Hamilton's too far back to get DRS off Verstappen, but Verstappen's, I don't know, 0.9 seconds to Latifi and he gets DRS off Latifi. I think that's so unfair because, like, you're technically, yeah, you're in front of them, but you're like, I don't know how to explain it, but you shouldn't get a DRS off the cars that are behind you but in front of you, that you're going a lap. There you go.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should ban DRS altogether, personally, because, as I say, we've got some of the best drivers in the world driving those cars around that track at potentially 200, 300 miles an hour, or 300 kilometres an hour, 200, 210, 220 miles an hour. They race in all weathers when there's spray off the track. I know we've had a couple of hiccups with excessive rain this year, but you've got drivers who are doing 190 miles an hour behind each other, and really they can't see each other because of the amount of spray. All they're looking for is the red light.
What were you saying about earlier about the net zero carbon? I was just thinking, because it's really silly in the 2023 calendar. I think it goes something like Austria to Canada to back to Spain. Why don't they just do all the European races, all the North America, South America, or like Australia, Europe, North, South America, Asia?
How can a business that runs petrol engine cars, diesel engine trucks, jet fuel planes be net zero? Best will in the world, it's not going to happen. Again, I think it's a marketing ploy. I really do, because
We Racers won.
Well, it's not so much we racers won, but when you're burning all that fuel, as you've just said, from Europe to Canada, back to Spain, then out to Brazil, Australia, Singapore, with all the equipment that's going on an aeroplane, you're still burning all that fuel. So, and then you've got cars that are doing 7 miles per gallon around a track. Where's the offset? Where is the offset?
What I do think is good, Sebastian Vettel. So you know how on the helmets they have the tear offs. So like say there was a dead fly or something, they just pull the bit of plastic off. Sebastian Vettel, rather than chucking it onto the track and causing like unnecessary waste, he keeps them in his cockpit and then he goes and puts them in a bin after a race. And so, because they have caused problems with people's aero, like I think it was Charles pulled a tear off, and then it got stuck in Max's car or vice versa, and so it causes a hindrance to the cars. But I do think they need to reevaluate. Like obviously, you know, contracts are tied with tracks, and there's certain rules that have to be followed in regards to tracks. But they do need to reevaluate how they do the calendar, not Canada.
The tear offs do at the end of the Grand Prix. Do people from F1 go around the track picking all the tear offs up?
Probably not.
So therefore, again, the net zero thing, you're littering. The fans obviously litter. The teams have got to tidy up and things like that. But how many times have you seen Vettel picking up rubbish on the stands and in the grounds and things like that? And everybody else just walks past it like it's below them. People, the F1 fraternity need to realise that without the spectators, they wouldn't have a series to race in. And again, it all comes down to the cost involvement, because everything is just so expensive.
Well, you know how F1 are trying to make it more targeted towards the young people, so we're adding loads and loads of races in America, which in my opinion we don't need. But the Vegas tickets went on sale, and I think someone said like the cheapest for the entire weekend was $2,000. And it's just like, realistically, if you're on minimum wage, that's like £9 something an hour. How can you afford to go to these races? And it's targeting the influencers, the celebrities, the high-profile people who would probably have the money to sponsor F1. It's not targeting the youthful fans, because most people who are teens earn less than £9 something an hour, so they have no money, and so it's targeting the wrong audience.
What? Yes, but it is. We don't need this many races in America.
No.
But at the end, FIA or F1 is an American-based company.
Well, yeah, Liberty Media.
Liberty Media. So therefore, they're going to maximise in America because, well, let's face it, it's going to help the shares. It's going to help themselves in the long run. But yeah, I mean, again, why do they pay drivers such an extortion amount of money?
Yeah, $40 million. I think Hamilton's on.
Well, yeah, 40 million. Why does he need $40 million?
Well, the base going rate is something like 500,000 when you first get into it. I remember reading Yuki was on 500,000.
Yeah, but yeah, the salary is always going to be there because it's a high risk sport, and potentially they're driving a missile. But again, they've got to look at. I think the price cap that obviously Red Bull got, or the overspend that Red Bull got, that doesn't include the drivers or the high executive salaries.
I want to know what Christian Horner's on.
Well, it's something you'll never find out, to be honest with you. But I wouldn't have thought he'd be on any less than probably £30 million a year, something. But again, I mean, he's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders. If he doesn't deliver, best will in the world, like any football managers, if they don't deliver the results, they can be got rid of.
Just like snap of
the fingers. That's right. But he's doing a very good job, and obviously he's keeping his drivers happy. And obviously he's just got another Constructors' Championship and another Drivers' Championship. So something's going right for him.
What was it about Aston Martin's cost cap were we thinking?
£450,000 overspent. £450,000 fine, I think it was.
Just like pocket money to the super rich, isn't it?
Well, it is. That's exactly what it is, because Aston Martin have fined £450,000, $450,000 procedural infringements, and it's got to be paid within 30 days. From so they've got reduced time in the F1 simulator in the wind tunnel, and it said that it was overspent because of including areas such as costs for its new headquarters, wind tunnel, additional fees, and costs relating to its new simulator. Not being funny, but they know these costs at the start of the year. If you build a new factory, a new simulator, you know what the costs are. And again, I think it's just a blatant disregard for the rules.
Well, teams like Haas, a couple of years ago, it was on Drive to Survive. They couldn't hardly afford to like fund anything, and so their development was hindered, and because it was all coming out of Gene Haas's pocket, and so I feel like the monetary side, it's just if you're like a poor team, you're at a complete disadvantage. Obviously not poor, but like you need to get more and more sponsors. But then if you haven't got the results, the sponsors don't want you. So you haven't got as much money, so you can't develop a better car. And it's just a negative circle. But it is unfair that they've been given little tiny punishments. Whereas if Haas had that punishment, it would probably mean the loss of jobs for some people.
Yeah, Christian Horner said that the fine imposed on them would have a knock-on effect to his staff with mental health issues, because obviously he's saying that the pressure that's put on the staff and all of that because of the draconian the penalty breach was described as draconian, but he's got to defend himself, hasn't he? He knows it's happened. He's got to defend it, and he's got to try and cover up as much as he can. The fact that Ted Kravitz made a comment in the pit lane, and then Red Bull snubbed Sky Sports for interviews. Again, it's just, for want of a better word, pathetic.
I do think that, obviously, if you're in the public eye, you're allowed to have whatever opinion you want, but there's a certain way to go about it. And maybe it was just a slip of Ted's tongue, but I don't know, I feel like he just shouldn't have said it to, I don't know how many viewers Sky Sports F1 get, but to millions and millions of viewers, he shouldn't have really gone out and said.
No, but it wasn't aimed at the drivers, it was aimed at Michael Massey, who was obviously in charge of the race at the time. He was the race director. Now, obviously, he was later removed, and he was implicated in the FIA's investigation, which cited human error. Well, I'm not being funny, but these races happen year on year, time on time again. And if you're going to have human error in one race, what's to say that you're not going to have human error in the next race and the next race and the next race? So Ted Kravitz was quite entitled for his opinion, and to say that, because at the time it was a complete and utter farce. And the fact that Verstappen won the title in such a strange way,
it's unheard of, unprecedented.
Well, that's right. You've probably never seen it before, and you'll probably never see it again.
What I do completely disagree with, obviously Latifi crashed and caused the safety car, which in turn caused the chain of events that led to Verstappen's first title. But him, Latifi, and Michael Massey, I think they both got death threats, like completely vile death threats from fans.
Everybody on the sidelines is an expert in every field.
Yeah.
You've got fans who might only go to 2 races a year, but they'll be experts. They'll know everything there is to know. They'll know the ins, the outs, the whys, the wherefores, without even listening to the conversations, the discussions that were had by teams, by different people. But you're always going to get that in every walk of life. It's one of those things that is going to happen. You're always going to get people who know better than the people involved with the sport.
Well, I think it's quite good because Lando, so obviously his fan base is there's quite a few young teen girls in there, but Lando's been speaking out about his mental health because he streams on a site called Twitch, but he used to regularly stream on Twitch. But then people just send him abuse in the comments section or live chat or whatever, and so he has been quite outspoken about mental health. And I feel like, as a whole, Formula One needs to take note of the mental health, and like you said about Christian Horner saying about the mental health of the teams, and the fact that people in high places are talking about it shows that we do need to change as a society and as fans, because I've seen so many people sending death threats to drivers, and it's like, really? It's a bit pathetic that you do that.
Everybody's got their own opinion. Everybody's got their different way of doing things. At the end of the day, sending a death threat is nasty, inappropriate, and totally unnecessary. And yeah, it must affect the drivers because they're frightened of going out. They're frightened of doing this. They're frightened of doing that. They can't live a normal life. But on the back of that, they chose to go into the sport. The fact that they chose to go into that sport, they knew it was high profile. They knew that wherever they went, they would be getting mobbed. They would be getting abuse. And again, the abuse comes down to the obscene amount of money that they earn from both sponsorship and wages. And some of them blab about the way they live, the way they do things. They go on the TV, they go on Drive to Survive. There was the thing about Dan Ricciardo when he joined McLaren and go to the gym, he does this, he does that, he does the other. But the sport dictates that the drivers are like that.
Well, did you see, talking about being mobbed, at the Mexican Grand Prix, the drivers had to resort to having security people because Pierre Gasly did an interview and he said that as he was walking through the paddock, because the paddock was ridiculously overfilled, people were going in his backpack and his passport was in his backpack, and like when he got to the AlphaTauri thing, hospitality, everything was unzipped.
Again, they're targets, aren't they?
Yeah.
People know that they'll carry certain things. They might not have money and things like that, but imagine if a fan got hold of their mobile phone. Yes, they might be able to unlock. Well, they probably would be able to unlock it somehow. But can you imagine the damage that could cause? And really, again, they knew what they were getting into when they joined the sport. It's not ideal. It's not right. Because at the end of the day, you should be safe. You should be able to walk down your street. You should be able to walk anywhere you want, go anywhere you want. And if someone comes up to talk to you, you expect a civil conversation as opposed to a torrent of abuse.
What I do think, so I think the fact that we were on about Liberty Media earlier, I think the fact they've opened the paddock up to fans and you can photograph and you can take videos in there, I think that's good. But back in the days of Bernie Ecclestone, I don't know how long ago that was, but you couldn't video in the paddock. So do you think that added like maybe an element of safety and relaxation for the drivers? Because like I think one of the ex-employees for Red Bull said that during a race weekend, if Max was being hounded by media, he went and hid with the engineers who were like behind the scenes just so he could escape the pressure and the constant hounding from the TV crews, the journalists.
But surely it's written into his contract that they have to do a certain amount of media. I would have thought that they couldn't turn up at the track and just do their own thing. They would have an interview at 10 o'clock, an interview at 10:30, an interview at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and their life when they're at the circuit is not their own. They are a publicity machine. It's not Lewis Hamilton, and it's not Max Verstappen, it's not Pierre Gasly. It's a representative of the team that they're driving. Hence, whenever you see them, they're head to toe in the sponsor's gear. Petronas, Hugo Boss, Red Bull, Pepe Jeans.
Well, Pierre Gasly has a sunglass collection, and so he wears them to promote the brand.
So there you go. Yeah, I mean that's it. It comes down to they are a PR machine. They are a PR machine. They are a marketing tool, and that's basically how they live their life. When they have the time off, they really don't have time off as much as people think they do. But with regards to being trolled, being abused, being anything like that, it shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen. It doesn't matter whether they're coloured, whether they're white, whether they're Asian, whether they're English. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, they're still people. They're very highly paid people. They're very high-profile people, but they're still normal people. And there is no I can't think of the word. There's no need for it, because apart from the money, they're the same as us.
Well, I think it was on Drive to Survive. Daniel Ricciardo was having a bit of a bad day, and so he said to the McLaren employee, like, what's the fine if we don't go to media and do the post-race or post-quali or whatever interviews in the media pen? And the McLaren employee said 50,000, which to Daniel Ricciardo, I bet, like, not that much money, but it's just...
Yeah, but again, it comes down to the fact that when they're at a race, they are a PR machine.
Yeah.
They are. It's not Daniel Ricciardo. It's whatever number he is. Number 3. He drives number 3 car. He's an employee of the company, and at the end of the day, yeah, he's very high profile. But it comes down to the fact of they're there to make the team money, to make themselves money, to make the team money, and to make everything look good.
Yeah, I agree. There is a nickname for George Russell, and rather than having Russell, you put PR Russell.
But again, George Russell had a horrendous start at the Grand Prix. He qualified 2nd or 3rd on the grid, and he dropped 2 places straight off. And really, he never recovered. I think he's having a bit of a tough time. Lewis has come back on song, which I think is good. He's found his mojo again, so to speak. And Russell, you'll always have, in every team, you'll have a first and a second driver. They say that there's not a first and a second driver, but there is a first and a second driver, always. There always has, and there always will be. Charles Leclerc is number 1 driver within Ferrari. Max Verstappen is number 1 driver within Red Bull.
Red Bull are quite open about it, though. It's like Checo knows he's the second driver. He knows he's there to support Max and support the team. Whereas Toto's like, no, we don't have a second driver.
Well, that's a very blinkered view, because obviously George Russell would hold if Lewis Hamilton was in the lead, Max Verstappen was in 3rd. I'm sure that George Russell would do everything within his power via team orders to hold Verstappen up, so to give Lewis Hamilton the chance of stretching his lead.
I think team orders should be completely banned. They say they've banned it, but obviously it's not as obvious as when Schumacher and Barrichello, or whoever Schumacher was teammates with, when they were just like, Rubens, move and let Michael through. But I think still you do have your team orders, and I just think they need to get rid of them completely. And if you do something that you're suspected to be of team orders, but you need to be given a fine or a punishment.
There is the team orders thing isn't as blatant as it was, but obviously they'll be having the discussion because we don't hear all the commentary on the TV screen. We don't see all the radio messages and all that. But I'm sure that team orders are discussed in briefings before the match, before qualifying, before free practice, and basically before the race. They've probably already discussed team orders for the last race of the season. I would have thought it will be discussed en masse as opposed to individual race.
Well, look at the plans. Like you've got like strategy F or something. They never explicitly say what strategy F is, but Charles, for example, knows exactly what they're on about, exactly what time they're on about, and because they've got all of it memorized. So I don't know, strategy B could be, right, Checo, get out of the way, it's Max's turn to lead.
Again, I mean, it comes down to good racing, basically. That can help when they come out and say target +6. Yeah, we don't know what it means. They know what it means. But the thing is, each team can listen to everybody else's radio communications.
Yeah.
So they're not going to say, they're not going to put it in plain English. They're not going to say, right, we were going to box on lap 27. We're now going to go to lap 33. Do you want to come in for tyres? Do you want hard? Do you want soft? Do you want super soft? Depending on obviously the track temperature, the track conditions, and the weather conditions. Because sometimes, as we know, races are won and lost in the pit lane.
Well, yeah, there was that one race where Ayrton Senna, I don't know which race it was, but he won it in the pit lane, not through tyre strategy or anything like that, because I don't think they really had that in Ayrton Senna's day, or they had like a less intense version of it. But he thought there was an extra lap, and so he drove past the pit lane, or drove through the pit lane to his pit box, henceforth going past the finish line, and so he actually won the race whilst
in the pit lane.
Yeah, it's really difficult.
Again, I mean, it comes down to, again, you can throw this out there. Are the drivers just pilots, or are they actual drivers? Go back to the likes of James Hunt, Sterling Moss, when they had to change gears, no power steering. They were proper racers, if you like. Whereas now, it seems as though they're just pilots. Yeah, they change gear through a semi-auto box. They use the clutch when they first start off. But apart from that, they don't. I think a certain amount of driver skill has been taken away because it's all telemetry. Again, telemetry is a massive tool. It's used in great depth, and they can tell you where you broke, if you accelerated too early, if you braked too early. And again, I mean, it comes down to net zero. When they're using eight sets of tyres a weekend, how can you be net zero when you're using a tyre for 37 laps, 37 laps at a push? And then the tyre goes back to Pirelli and gets recased, a new casing on it.
What you were saying about driver skill, I remember I read an article, and Sterling Moss, apparently, he said to his engineer or his little team man, he said, there's something wrong with the car and you need to get it sorted. And they were like, nah, mate, like nothing's showing, like you're completely making it up. I don't know who it was, Sterling Moss, it could have been someone else. But it turns out that one of the suspensions or something, no, not suspension, one of the bits of the car had broken, and you couldn't visually see that it had broken, but because he was like, he just knew something was off, because I don't know if the car was a bit off balance or it's just something was wrong, and he knew it because he could feel it.
Yeah, I mean they've taken the driver's skill in one respect away from the driver. Again, you hear the messages, something's not right with the car. Okay, we'll look into it. Oh, nothing's wrong with the car. How can they look into something wrong with the car? You just pulled up a prime example there. How can telemetry tell you that you've got a suspension bush that's worn, or you've got a suspension component that's broken and things like that? Again, the cars are too technical. Put them back to being proper cars with proper gearboxes. Yeah, we know Formula One is a massive testing bed and a testing ground, if you like, for road cars. A lot of the things that they do on the track equate, or you see them in a few years' time on road cars. And without that development, we'd still be driving Austin Allegros. But we can drive a McLaren. Anybody, if they've got the money, can go and buy a McLaren and drive it down the road, be it a P1, be it a Senna. And without the development of F1, that wouldn't be possible.
Well, look at this car that Mercedes have launched. I'm not quite sure what car it is. Oh, AMG one. Completely inspired by F1 technology. And so, yeah, because, you want to have the fastest car, let's be honest. Like, going down the motorway, everyone thinks they're Lewis Hamilton. And I think F1, it does, like, they have groundbreaking movements in technology, in cars, in everything. But I agree with they need to have more driver skill, and they need to make, like, because the steering wheels, like, look at what they were back in Michael Schumacher's day compared to what they are now. They are literally computers, but like this big.
And the average steering wheel of an F1 car is plus £200,000. A million. I don't know exactly the price, but you've got all those little knobs and dials, and yeah, as you say, we don't know what it's for. We don't know. You can adjust the brake bias front to rear. And at the end of the day, when you're spending £200,000 on a steering wheel, obviously it's got to do a job. But backtrack into the days of James Hunt and Niki Lauda, Sterling Moss, it was a steering wheel. That's all it was. It was connected to a steering rack to the front wheels, and it was a steering wheel. You had a gear shift down by your side, but now, I mean, the cockpits are that tight that you wouldn't be able to change these. You'd have to open the cockpits out, and again, there presents a problem, because does that reduce the amount of protection the driver has?
Well, the bit they sit in, I think it's made out of titanium. I could be wrong on that, but basically, it can only survive one impact. There is a proper name for it, but yeah, it can only survive one impact. But did you notice when Mick Schumacher crashed in Monaco, his rear of his car, where his engine and stuff is, completely detached? Because that's a new safety measure, because Grosjean, obviously Bahrain 2020, up in flames. So the fact that it detaches, it creates a safety element. But I'm pretty sure that where they sit can only survive one impact.
Yeah, it's because they're doing plus 220 miles an hour. The cars need to be safe. Yeah. It needs collapsible structures at the front. It needs to be safe, but then you've got a car that hits a metal barrier and splits in half. You've got Grosjean. Is it Grosjean when his car burst into flames? Yeah. And then Mick Schumacher split in half. Really, that shouldn't be happening. They've made it that if there's a problem with the tyres, they're tethered now. They shouldn't fly off by rights, and it's a safety issue, and safety is regardless of the cost, regardless of the cost to spend, the the cost caps, the fines imposed. Safety is paramount, because at the end of the day, those guys are only going to work, and they should come home after work in one piece.
Well, look at because the Halo's obviously a great invention. It saved quite a number of lives. But Gene Todd, when he was working for the FIA, he was a big. I think he was like really pushing for the Halo to be created, and he's done a lot for the safety of F1. And there was someone else who I've forgotten the name of that's also done a lot for the safety of F1. But look at like Niki Lauda's crash at the Nürburgring. How he walked out of that in those days, honestly, the man's a.
He didn't really walk out of it,
Okay.
did he? Basically, melted because of the fire. I mean, yeah, you've got a massive engine behind you, or an engine that's burbling away at probably 500 degrees, and then you've got a fuel tank virtually sat on top of it, and best will in the world, you're going to have a fire. Look at the picture. Look when they used to refuel in the pits, and one of the cars went up in flames.
Yeah, that was Jos.
A bit of fuel leaked out. But you've always got to be safe, and like I say, at the end of the day, they've got to go home because they're only doing a job. So for safety, regardless, is paramount. But does the safety issue get pushed aside sometimes? The answer obviously is no, because the cars are safe. You can smack it into a wall at 200 miles an hour and literally
just have a bruise.
Potentially have a bruise, potentially do like Schumacher did at Silverstone when he put it into the tyre wall, and he broke both his legs. It's a catch-22 situation. Any development within safety, I think, should have an unlimited cost cap within reason. I know that's a silly statement to say, but safety is paramount. Whether they spend 50 million or 100 million, if it benefits the end user, and also on a waterfall effect, not the waterfall effect, the knock-on effect down to road cars to make them safer, then I think it's only a good thing.
Well, yeah, look at the helmets now compared to, like, I don't know, Fangio's days. Because in Fangio's days, they were just like tin hats with goggles. And we've got the Hans device now, which was a brilliant invention because it stops. Basically, if Senna had had the Hans device, they reckon he would have survived his crash because his head went forward, so broke his neck. Whereas the Hans device, because it's on your shoulders, you can only go so far forwards and then you ping your head back.
But again, the Hans device sits on your shoulders. Why isn't the Hans device strapped to your torso? Because again, best will in the world, yeah, it can only go so far, but surely if the speed is severe enough, then you can still...
Yeah, you exceed the limit.
Yeah, basically, you're pushing that boundary, whereas if it was strapped to your torso, unless you were thrown from the vehicle, again, you've got to reduce every possible cause of injury.
Yeah, when we were talking about Niki Lauda, because it was yet again on Instagram, there was a photo of his helmet from when he'd had the crash at the Nürburgring, and it was completely melted, and obviously he had quite severe facial scarring. And then there was a comparison with Grosjean's helmet, and it was, I think the visor had like melted, but he only came away with scarred hands, which was an absolute miracle. But you can tell that helmets have like changed, and they do seem to be looking at safety more and more in Formula One, like the fireproof suits, fireproof underwear, fireproof gloves, fireproof this, fireproof that. Yeah.
His hands he lost quite a bit of skin off his hands.
Yeah, they had to graft it from his bum apparently, so he said that every time he shook hands with someone, it was like they were shaking his bum.
He was very lucky. The fact that the car actually split in half,
Yeah, there's a photo of what Haas got given back, and it's just basically the front what's it called, nose cone, and the front wing completely gone. The back end of the car completely gone, and just a little tub that they sit in. That's all that was left of it. And it's one of those, oh my god, how does that happen moments.
Yes, it's you're all the nature of the sport. You're always going to get accidents. You're always going to get injuries. But hopefully, we won't have any more fatalities. Obviously, we had Roland Ratzenberger, Ayrton Senna,
Jules Bianchi, Antoine Hubert in Formula 2.
You should never lose a life in a sport. Yes, it happens, but we don't want. That's not what we want. That's not what we want. We want to see exciting racing. We want to see fighting on the track for track position, for grid position. We want to see that, and that's again. We want them to come home or go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, because MotoGP, obviously they're a bunch of nutters, and like British Superbikes, but obviously that is a lot riskier than F1. But there have been, I think, quite a lot more deaths in MotoGP, and I don't know how MotoGP go about their safety, because I don't really watch it unless it's the highlights. But do MotoGP need to reevaluate this head protection, because quite a few of them, if they go off and the tyre hits the head, they get severe irreparable brain damage and either have to go on life support or unfortunately pass away.
There's always going to be an element of risk in every sport that you do. Again, just backtracking, people know what they're getting into when they get into the sport. They know that it's a dangerous sport. They know the risks involved. Yes, there's deaths in F1, F2, superbikes, MotoGPs, but for the fact of they're getting over to 57 degrees tilt and going around corners, and they're sliding going into corners, and they're accelerating away, and they've got the front wheel in the air. So literally they're going round a corner on an angle on one wheel. It's amazing that there aren't more fatalities in MotoGP. You look at, just going completely off the cuff, but you look at Guy Martin in the TT. He slammed it into a flint wall, and he came away with hundreds of broken bones, and he's got pins in his body and whatever. But he's just, I don't suppose luck comes into it, to be honest with you. I suppose if you're gonna crash, you've got to do it properly and make sure you're away from the bike. So in that respect. But that's my F1. I mean, F1, you're in the car and you're not going to stop until you hit something.
On a more positive note, do you have any predictions for the Brazilian Grand Prix?
No, I haven't even thought about the Grand Prix. But you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be between Verstappen, Checo, Hamilton, Russell, Sainz, and Leclerc. So there's your top 6 places. I would like to see the lower teams, as in Aston Martin, as in Alfa Romeo, and even Fernando Alonso, Alpine do well, because Fernando Alonso had a storming race. He was going really, really well. And then obviously he lost his engine. So, and knowing the rules, if he changes his engine, he'll probably get a penalty for changing his engine, unless he's still got some spare engine.
Yeah, I think the engines, it's really silly because they last for, I think it's 5 races, and they're allowed 3 engines. And with the addition of, 24 races, I think, next year, they should be allowed to have more engines, because it's just,
I totally disagree, to be honest with you. Why should F1s be allowed? The engineering is so precise and so matter of fact these days. The tolerances involved are minuscule. Surely you've got engineers who should be able to strip that engine down, rebuild that engine, and it should be as good as new. Yeah, new parts, pistons, valves, etc., that sort of thing. But why should they have engine? Again, it comes down to the costs involved. Why should they have 5 engines or 6 engines to use in a year? You don't have 5 or, if you own a car for 15 years, you don't have 5 or 6 engines to use, or 5 or 6 gearboxes. Again, an engine's what, nearly £1 million, if not more. I don't know exactly, but you've got all these costs involved, which I suppose it's because they race at such a high, or they rev to such a high rate, that there's always going to be internal stresses put on the engine. But I don't think that they should have any more than, well, I don't. If you go to the GT cars, for argument's sake, the GT cars, they use the same engine all the time. Unless there's a breakdown, they strip it out, they repair it, they rebuild it, and put it back in. Again, it's all cost. It's all additional cost that the teams have to swallow. But then on the back of that, it's passed down to the end user, as in the public, via the merch.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of the Avoid the Tyrewall podcast, and thank you to Martin for agreeing to be a special guest presenter. Let us know your thoughts on the Mexican Grand Prix and other issues that we covered within this episode. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.